Welcome to JonGetsGames. Today I'll be reviewing New York 1901. In this game, players are in the middle of a land grab where they're desperately trying to grab plots of land and build buildings in the middle of downtown New York in 1901. Now, money is no object in this game. The only thing that matters is consolidating your land and building the biggest and best buildings that you possibly can. First, I'm going to play through a bunch of turns so you can see how the game plays and how it feels, and then I'll jump into my review. Here's the starting setup for a 3-player game of New York 1901. Each of our 3 players has 3 bonus cards as well as their starting bronze buildings. They'll get silver and gold buildings, but I'll show you those as they come into play. Over here we have the 4 endgame bonus cards, which are randomized each game, and I'll explain how those work in just a little bit. We've got some neutral, really big buildings that players can get to near the end of the game. And finally, and most importantly, we have the card row of cards, which players will be able to grab in order to dictate where they build on the map. Alright, let's start with the blue player's turn. On a player's turn, they have 2 different actions that they can choose from. The first is they can acquire land over here and potentially build buildings. The second is they can demolish buildings that are already on the map in order to put better buildings down. Well, no players start the game with any buildings out here, so they're going to have to start by acquiring land. You'll notice that the colors on these cards match with the different colors in the central New York area. You'll also notice that these cards either have 2 spots or 3 spots on them. It's easy to spot the 3 spots because they also have a little floral pattern on the cards as well as floral patterns out on the map. So noticing these floral patterns making 3 areas, you'll also see that the non-floral pattern areas make up little zones of 2 each, and every single one of these little zones on the board is matched 1-to-1 with a card in this deck. So effectively, if we were to play this entire deck out, then every single plot on this board would be occupied. In order to acquire land, a player simply picks one of these cards, and for instance, let's say the blue player is going to pick this blue card here. Then the player takes one of their worker tokens and claims a plot on the board that matches that color. As you can see, this is a 2-spot blue card. That means that the blue player can put this worker down on any one of the double spot blue areas on the board. In this case, I think the blue player will probably put it right here. The reason this spot is good is because if you look over at the endgame scoring bonuses over here, we have Broadway, Nassau and Broad, and Pine and Thames. More importantly, this is the blue, brown, and green roads. It makes it a little simpler to look on the board, and you'll notice that the blue road goes here, the brown road goes here, and the green road goes here. These endgame bonus cards are essentially area majority. At the end of the game, whoever has the most buildings next to Broadway, for instance, is going to take this card and get 5 points. So this spot right here is good because it is both on Nassau and Pine, so a building in this location is going to compete for both of those bonuses. Once a player has claimed their land, they can optionally build a building. In this case, this land is just 2 sections wide. However, our blue player does have a bunch of these tiny little buildings which only take 2 different spots to build. Now the blue player might leave this here on the board to try and get more plots next to it to build bigger buildings, but I think our blue player wants to start out by building buildings on the board, so they go ahead and take this guy off, put this building down on the board, and now this building is worth 2 victory points for the blue player. We mark that on the track right over here. And lastly, we refill this card row for the next player. So here the green player just occupied this zone. I'd like to point out that when you do your optional build, you can of course kick out multiple of your workers in order to claim those areas. Now you don't need any more workers to claim this little red spot here because you know by definition that green is owning that spot right there. So here our yellow player is going to take this triple space, put their worker down here. They're going to go ahead and take their triple bronze building, place it in this spot, and this gets them 3 points. It puts them at 12 points, which is greater than 10, and this means that they have now unlocked their silver buildings. From this point on, yellow can build silver or bronze buildings because they still have 1 bronze building left. Okay, so it's our yellow player's turn, and they now have these silver buildings unlocked, as does the blue and green player. This unlocks the second option that players can do on their turn, which involves demolishing old buildings to put up new buildings. So when you do this, you can destroy any number of buildings on the map that you want, and then you put a building down of the next generation. So from bronze, we go to silver, and then from silver, we end up going to gold. Now, it's worth noting that once players get to the 25-point mark on the board, they will unlock the golden buildings. So in this instance, our yellow player is actually going to demolish all of these buildings right here in order to place this big building down on the board. Now it's important to note that you don't lose these victory points here. Instead, you just gain another 6 points for this particular building. and these buildings are taken out of the game. By demolishing, if you had freed up an entire lot that you did occupy before, you would need to take one of your workers and put it down on the map to claim it, but in this instance, everybody knows that these two spots are yellows because they can see the way the dotted lines work. Alright, it's now our green player's turn, and I think this is a good spot to explain these bonus cards here. As I mentioned before, they are one-time use cards that give you a really good effect. The first one here is build two buildings. So you normally get one optional build. This lets you optionally build two buildings. But more importantly, what our green player is going to do is activate this card here. It lets you take two cards from this card row as long as neither of them are 3 value. So the green player is just going to flip this over in their area to show that they've used it, and they're going to go ahead and grab both of these green lots because that's pretty good buying power, being able to get two of the same. It doesn't have to be the same, but it often makes sense. The green player will take these guys and plunk them down here, and they figure they may as well cash that out immediately for this square building to go right there. And the last of these bonuses is a card that you can flip over in order to flush the entire card row and get new cards. And I think our yellow player is going to do that because they don't like any of these options. So they're going to flip that card over. All of these cards get taken and they actually go to the bottom of the deck, which means they will likely not be seen again. And then we go ahead and see 4 more cards. Now our yellow player can take their regular turn with the new cards that are available. By placing this tile down, the yellow player has gone past 25 points. This is going to unlock the gold buildings. It's also important to note that these communal buildings over here are also gold buildings, so they can only be placed out onto the board once a player has crossed the 25-point mark. Each player is only allowed to build one of these really big buildings, but they have the highest victory points in the game for building, so players are definitely gunning to put these down on the board. This seems like a pretty good moment to explain the last of the bonus cards. Every game always has 3 road bonus cards out of all of the roads, so the roads that are good change from game to game, but there's always 3 of them. Then there is always this last bonus card which alters quite a bit the way the game is going to play. In this particular game we have Gold Tycoon, and that says that the player gets 3 bonus points for each color region on the board where they have at least 2 gold buildings. So that's another reason for our yellow player to put 2 gold buildings down into the green area, because that's going to be an extra 3 points at the end of the game. There are several different of these bonuses at the end of the game, and they can really alter the way the game works. Some of them have to do with putting down different shapes of buildings. Some of them have to do with leaving old buildings on the board, but this game, all these players care about is getting their gold buildings spread out into the different zones. It's our green player's turn, and they've decided to build one of these communal buildings. So they're going to go ahead and do a demolish action, so they demolish all of these buildings in this zone in order to play the Metropolitan Life building. We put it down right there. Green is going to have to put a marker here to show that they do own that spot. And then lastly, each player comes with a little trophy icon, which they put on the building to signify that they do control that building. The green player will also flip over this build another building action in order to drop this last gold building down right into that spot. So that was a pretty big turn for green. They just got 14 points. It's now yellow's turn, and it's important to note that yellow only has 5 buildings left. Now there are 2 different endgame conditions. The first is if we go through this entire draw deck and there are only 3 cards left in the buying area, but we have quite a bit of cards left here. The other is once a player only has 4 different buildings left. So the yellow player with 5 is very close. As soon as they play one more building, it will initiate the last round of the game. In either event, the player who initiates the endgame is going to finish their turn, and every other player is going to get one final turn. In this instance, yellow is actually going to build a communal building, so that is not going to reduce from the supply, and the game will keep going for a little bit longer. Alright, so the yellow player has played their 5th building. They only have 4 buildings left. This means that the yellow player will no longer have any more turns, and the blue and green player each get one more turn. Alright, the game is over, so now let's look at those endgame bonuses. The first one is Pine and Thames. So we look at the green road and we see how many buildings are adjacent to it for each color. We see that blue has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 buildings. They're probably going to win. Yellow has 1, 2, 3, and green has 1, 2, 3, 4. So this 5-point bonus goes to the blue player. The last bonus is the Gold Tycoon. So let's go ahead and do these in order. We have the blue player here. Let's see if they have any regions that have 2 gold buildings in them. There are 2 gold buildings for blue in the pink area, so that is 3 points. Now let's look at green. Now they have these 2 gold buildings here, which are both in the green and pink district. That means it counts for both. So right off the bat, green is going to get 3 plus 3 points. And green was able to do the same thing over here with the yellow district and red district with these 2 gold buildings. So that is again 3 plus 3 points. And finally, our yellow player has 2 gold buildings in the green district for 3 points. They have 2 gold buildings in the yellow district for 3 points. And that's it for the Gold Tycoon scoring. And the last thing that gets points is each unused ability card gets the player 1 point. So blue gets 1 point and green gets 1 point. These are the final scores. Green had 78, yellow with 72, and blue with 69. And I believe I was able to show you pretty much all the rules on how to play the game. Let's start the review section off by jumping into the first positive point, which for me is the variety of endgame bonus cards that come with the game. Now, you only use one of these each time you play the game, but they are quite different from one another. There's a really good variety in the box. The one I used for my gameplay example just involved trying to get 2 gold buildings down into as many of the regions as you can to really spread out. But there are others that have you directly competing with the other players on the table, like having the most or least of specific buildings in various ages and types. And so now you're really paying attention to how many your opponents have on the table, and you're going to be playing around that. There's going to be more player interaction in that specific type of game. And there is another one where you get points while you're playing the game. It isn't even an endgame scoring card in that case. It's just an ongoing scoring card. So I really like that variety, and I also know that they have promo packs that have a bunch more of these bonus cards that you can put into the game to get even more variety there, and I think that's just great. I also love the way that you draw 3 street cards at the beginning of each game, and that makes different streets a priority for the players. So Broadway isn't always a street you want to be on. Some games it'll be great, and some games people will be avoiding it because it doesn't give you that endgame bonus for having the majority of buildings on there. So I just like the large amount of variety that this brings to the game. Positive number 2 is that I really like the demolition action that you have in this game. Most tile-laying games involve putting tiles on the board and pretty much leaving them there for the rest of the game. But in this game, you get to wipe them off in a pretty fun way, just like remove those, explode them, and put a new big shiny building down. That's just kind of viscerally fun, and it just feels good. You get all those points, and it looks good on the board. In addition to that, there are some interesting decisions there because you have those endgame bonuses for the different streets on the map, but you only get those points if you have the most buildings on that road, not necessarily the most building power. So you really need to think about how you're going to be demolishing your buildings. If you wipe out 3 buildings to put one big one down, you might be getting a bunch of points for replacing that building, but you also might be giving up the bonus that that street was potentially giving you in that moment if you were in the lead, or you might just put it into a situation where your opponent just has way too many buildings on that spot and you can't even run up to catch them. So it's fun to think about the ramifications of this demolition action, and I just like doing it. Positive number 3 is that I think this is a good gateway game, and I think it was designed from the beginning to be that. You could definitely introduce this game to people who are not familiar with modern board gaming and sit them down at the table and teach them all the rules in about 5 minutes and just start playing the game. You could probably teach it in less time than that because you don't even need to get into the details of those demolitions or even the endgame scoring conditions until you've played like 5 or 6 turns, and you can feed people the rules to the game as you go because, well, you can't demolish until you've unlocked those silver buildings anyway. I think this means that the game is also going to be easy to teach to younger people. I haven't had that experience, but I could definitely see that being the case. So all in all, it appears like this game was shooting to be a gateway experience for gamers, and I think it was able to do that. And now for my one neutral point, and that has to do with player interaction and being able to tell who is winning at any given time. This game has the ability to be kind of as cutthroat as your group wants to be. People can just kind of do their own thing and only take plots of land that stick onto their own zones, or you could take plots of land and really get into other people's business by screwing up their patterns and really stopping them from being able to build those really big buildings. The problem is that I have a hard time telling who is winning, and usually you're going to want to target the people who you perceive as the leader. I've also seen when I try to be offensive in this game and like get into other people's business, that it hasn't necessarily gotten me that many points, or it hasn't really been that effective to me. kind of feels like you could play this game very passively and be fine. And if you play aggressively against other players, you're not really going to get rewarded for that from my small amount of experience so far. So I don't think this is necessarily a problem. It just means I was hoping that the game would be a lot more cutthroat, especially with the people that I play with, than it has ended up being. Alright, and now for my one negative point. Simply put, I find most turns as you're playing this game to be pretty uninteresting. It seems like you're usually just taking a card and putting a dude on the map, and then taking another card and putting a dude on the map every time it comes around, and I'm looking at the faces of all the people I'm playing with, and no one is not having fun, but no one is really getting into it. It's a very passive, kind of low-key experience, and in general, I want a little more excitement in the game. You know, I want to be fearful about an awesome opportunity making it all the way back around to me. Am I going to be able to get it, or are they going to take it away from me? I want to be building up to really big things, and of course, you are trying to build up and consolidate your plots of land to the point where you can build those really big neutral pieces, or even just demolish to put some of your bigger, better gold buildings down. But those moments are pretty few and far between as you're playing the game. It just seems like there are a couple spikes of moderate excitement, but they're kind of filled in by a whole bunch of turns. So in general, I have never disliked playing the game. I haven't ended the game even once where I was like, oh man, that wasn't fun. But in general, if I'm going to be playing a game for an hour, I'm going to be looking for something that's a little more exciting and has more interesting decisions. So now let's discuss replayability. As I mentioned earlier in the positive points, this game has a really nice variety of endgame scoring cards and bonuses that are kind of shuffled up and different each time you play the game. So I like that at least the first 5 or 6 times you play this game, it's going to feel a little bit different in the things that you're going to be specifically gunning for because of those endgame bonuses. I will say that, you know, pertaining to that negative that I just went over, that the fact that the game is not terribly interesting to me as I'm playing it is going to hurt the replayability for myself, because I'm not excited to get the game out really all that much. I definitely see myself playing the game again. It's nowhere near the top of the list of games I want to keep putting down onto the table because it just has not engaged me too much yet. So I think that your mileage is definitely going to vary on this one. If you play the game once and you really enjoy it, then awesome. You are going to get a lot of mileage out of this. When you swap these cards in and randomize that endgame bonus setup, you're going to get a whole bunch of plays. But if you play this game the first time and you feel like, at the end of the game, well, you're probably only going to get a couple more plays out of that game, and your replayability will be much lower than average. So just keep all that in mind. Alright, let's discuss player count now. New York 1901 plays 2 to 4 players, and I've played all of those different sets, and I have to say that it works in all of those settings. But I think that the 4-player game is best, and the reason for that is because you have the most congestion and all sorts of crazy stuff going on the board as you're playing it. Maybe crazy stuff is a little bit of overselling it, but there's just more people that you're interacting with, and there's just less space. And a game like this needs constriction in order to be interesting at all. I think the 2-player game is the next best, because when you're playing that setting, you actually remove a whole bunch of the board. You take the pink lots completely out of the game, so you have a little bit more congestion, and in that case, you're just bouncing back and forth, and it's going to be a very quick game where you are just fighting each other as you go. When I played the 3-player game, it worked okay, but you have the entire board, much like the 4-player game, but you don't have that 4th player just getting in there and kind of messing everything up. As you probably saw in the gameplay video that I did, I had 3 different players playing, and at the end of the game, there was lots of different space around the board that could have been occupied still, and that's just a hallmark, I think, of playing the 3-player game. I would not tell somebody to not play it 3 players, but if I had my druthers, I would prefer to play it 4. In conclusion, I think New York 1901 is a solid game with good design. I think that it is what it was trying to be, and that is a lightweight, family-style gateway game. I could definitely see people who are not in the kind of modern board gaming environment who are intimidated by many of the games that we play all the time. I can see them sitting down and playing a game of this and just getting it. They're not going to be overwhelmed with the number of options they have in front of them. For the first many turns of the game, you're just going to be just grabbing one of those 4 cards and put a person on the map. You're hard-pressed to even hurt yourself by doing that. Just put people on the map, put buildings down, you should be fine. And I think that those people are going to be comforted and feel good about the fact that the rules were quite easy to teach, that you could kind of teach the game as you're playing it, and that the game is only going to last about an hour. I think that many people in that setting will have their appetite a bit wedded to try other games of this type, maybe games that are slightly more complicated, or just other games of this weight that are just different in other ways. I also think that in a family-style atmosphere with slightly younger people, this game would go along really well. Unfortunately, what that means is for people like me who are, very much into the board gaming hobby and have lots and lots of board games, this game did not really excite me. And I'm okay with lighter games with lots of simple actions that you can do, but I found that those simple actions that you're doing in this game did not generate enough interesting decisions in my head. I have not disliked playing the game. I could see myself playing it a couple more times because it's not a bad game, and there are some people that I play with that I think will enjoy this game, and I want to introduce it to them. But I'm not excited to play this game really at all, and I guess I'm not too surprised by that. So I think in general, I will recommend this game to people who play with players who are not used to more complicated board games or people in family type settings. But if you're looking for a game that might have a cutthroat, interesting, really kind of knife fighty situation down below the surface once you play it a couple times, I don't think that is going to be here. So if you're looking for that really competitive experience, I would look elsewhere. If you'd like to become more involved with the channel through voting on some of the games that I review and participating in question and answer vlogs, you can directly support it at patreon.com/JonGetsGames. Also, if you'd like to see more in-depth board game reviews like this one, as well as full game playthroughs and vlogs, please subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.